Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we're looking at something I think everyone listening can relate to. Fear.
Yeah, and not just, a momentary scare. We were talking about deep, paralyzing panic.
Right. And the source notes we have for today are just fascinating because they give us this really specific blueprint for dealing with that kind of fear.
They really do. It's a blueprint built out of a massive global crisis, a leader's private tragedy, and an ancient spiritual text.
Yeah, we're going to unpack all of that. But I want to start with this really compelling paradox from the notes. So, in 1933, you have Franklin Delano Roosevelt standing before a completely shattered nation.
Right, the Great Depression.
Exactly. And he famously tells America that the only thing they have to fear is, quote, fear itself. We've all heard it. But what the public didn't know at the time was that FDR was hiding a secret, paralyzing terror of his own.
It really is one of the most striking paradoxes you can find in modern history. I mean, the guy tasked with curing a massive collective panic was quietly battling this intense private nightmare.
It's wild. But before we get into his personal nightmare, we have to understand the sheer scale of the panic he was addressing. I mean, the 1930s were bleak.
You really can't overstate it. The macroeconomic numbers from the notes are just staggering. We are talking about a 25% unemployment rate.
1 in 4 people.
Right. But numbers like that, they can feel a bit abstract to us now. To really get the fear, you have to look at the visceral day-to-day reality of, say, a bank failure back then.
Yeah, because there was no safety net, like
Right.
no FDIC insurance,
Yeah.
right. If the bank went under, your money was just gone.
Exactly. I mean, imagine the mechanics of a 1930s bank run. You're walking down the street, you see a crowd gathering outside your local branch, and someone says, the bank is running out of cash.
Just in panic.
Total panic. Your brain's threat detection system just fires up. You rush to get in line. You're desperate to withdraw your life savings. But by the time you get to the window, the vault is empty.
And the doors lock.
The doors lock. In a single afternoon, the institution holding decades of your labor simply ceases to exist.
That's just terrifying. And the nerds point out it wasn't just savings either. Farmers were losing their land to repossessions. People literally couldn't feed their kids. It's this complete evaporation of certainty.
And when certainty evaporates on that massive of a scale, the basic societal contract shatters. It breeds this very contagious, very dangerous kind of collective terror.
Which brings us back to FDR stepping up to the microphone. He's looking out at a country totally consumed by this panic, and he delivers that iconic line. Let me read the full quote from the notes.
Sure.
He says, "Let me assert my firm beliefs that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance."
It's a masterful piece of rhetoric, absolutely. But if you look closely at the language there, it's also a highly acute psychological diagnosis.
That's the thing. We usually treat that quote like, I don't know, a motivational bumper sticker.
Right. Cheer up. Things will get better.
Exactly. But he isn't just saying that. He's defining fear as an active, destructive force. He literally calls it a paralysis.
Yeah, that word is key. Paralysis.
Think of a deer freezing in front of a speeding car. Like, on an evolutionary level, freezing is supposed to help you hide from predators.
Sure, it's a survival instinct.
Right. But in this context, the fear isn't protecting the deer. The fear is the exact mechanism that's going to get it killed.
That is a perfect way to look at it. FDR is doing something incredibly perceptive. He is diagnosing the country's reaction to the crisis as significantly more dangerous than the crisis itself.
Wait, I want to push back on that a little bit. How is the reaction worse than the actual problem? Because the bank's failing. I mean, that's a catastrophic literal problem.
Oh, it is catastrophic. But
Yeah.
what he calls the unreasoning, unjustified terror, that blind panic that makes people hoard what little cash they have or stop investing or completely turn on each other, that is the fatal condition.
Oh, I see. Because it stops the fix from happening.
Exactly. Economic recovery requires momentum. It requires trust. If a nation is literally paralyzed by terror, they can never take the coordinated steps required to, convert retreat into advance. The fear ensures the destruction.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. He's telling them, look, the economy's broken, but our panic is what guarantees it stays broken.
Precisely.
But here's where my mind immediately goes. How does a leader look a starving, panicking crowd in the eye and tell them to stop being afraid without sounding completely out of touch. I mean, he must have had some undeniable internal authority to pull that off.
He did, but it came from a very dark place. And to understand that authority, we have to look at his background, because before 1921, FDR's life was defined by absolute invulnerability.
He was like the ultimate golden boy.
Oh, totally. Born into immense generational wealth, educated in Europe, went to Harvard, then Columbia Law School.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second here. We're talking about a guy with literally every structural advantage a person can possibly have in the early 20th century. Wealth, status, connections. Even when he gets struck by polio at age 39, couldn't he just, I don't know, retreat to a mansion, hire a team of the best private doctors, and just live comfortably? It seems pretty easy to project fearlessness when you have a massive financial safety net, especially compared to, like, a destitute farmer.
You would certainly think so. And honestly, he did try to throw money at the problem initially, but the tragic irony of polio is that all the generational wealth in the world couldn't buy his nervous system back.
Wow. Yeah, money doesn't fix that.
No. In an instant, this man who had been completely insulated from the hardships of the world was struck down by a devastating physical blow. He lost the use of his legs, and that sudden, irreversible loss of autonomy just shattered his invulnerability.
And this leads to that paradox we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. Because we tend to mythologize our historical leaders, right? We want to believe they were just carved out of marble, naturally fearless from birth.
Oh, definitely. We'd love the hero myth.
But the notes reveal that during his recovery, FDR developed this extreme, consuming terror of fire.
A highly specific, very visceral fear.
Right. Because of his new disability, he was terrified he wouldn't be able to escape if a fire broke out in his home. Like, he realized he was physically trapped in his own body.
Yeah, just imagine that.
He could smell smoke, see the flames, and be completely unable to walk out of the room.
It's a terrifying scenario for anyone, let alone someone who had been so hyperactive and independent their entire life up to that point.
But just sit with the incredible irony of that for a second.
All right.
The man who stood in front of the world and defeated a nation's unreasoning, unjustified phantom fear was, in his own private life, battling a highly rational, completely justified fear of his own physical limitations.
Yeah, because it's totally reasonable to be afraid of a burning building if your legs don't work.
Exactly. It's not an irrational phobia. It's a logistical nightmare.
It is entirely rational. But notice how this highlights the underlying nature of fear itself. The fear he diagnosed in the nation was an abstract panic about the future of the economy. His personal fear of fire was concrete and immediate.
But the feeling is the same.
Exactly. The mechanism of both fears is identical. It's paralysis. Whether the threat is a phantom financial collapse or a very real spark in the fireplace, the physiological and psychological result is that you are trapped. You cannot move forward.
So how do you move forward? Because clearly he didn't just stay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for a spark. How did he practically defeat that literal paralysis?
Well, it was a brutal, grueling process. There was no overnight miracle here. First, he had to painstakingly regain the use of his hands and his upper body.
Just to get some basic mobility back.
Right. And then he had to teach himself to walk all over again. And the physical reality of how he did this is just staggering. The notes mention he walked with the aid of heavy steel braces locked onto his legs.
Oh man, I was reading up on those braces. They weighed something like 14 pounds. He was dragging 14 pounds of dead weight just to simulate standing upright.
Precisely. He literally had to construct an external metal framework to force his body to defy gravity. I mean, the physical exhaustion of just taking a single step was immense.
I can't even imagine.
But once he engineered that physical mobility, he took that same methodical, defiant approach to his professional life. He forced himself back into the political arena. He went out and campaigned for the governorship of New York. And he actually won.
Okay, wait. I was looking at the timeline of his life in the notes, and I just realized something totally mind-blowing.
What's that?
He wins that race and becomes governor of New York in 1929.
Yes.
1929.
Yeah.
That is the exact historical moment the entire nation is plunging headfirst into its own massive systemic paralysis with a stock market crash.
The timing is almost too perfect for fiction, isn't it?
It really is. As the country's legs are basically being cut out from under it, FDR is just figuring out how to stand back up. He was learning to overcome personal, physical paralysis just in time to be placed in charge of a state and eventually a country that was experiencing a total economic paralysis.
And that is exactly why his words held such undeniable authority.
Hmm.
When he tells the American people that they have to convert retreat into advance, he isn't just delivering, speechwriter fluff.
No, he's lived it.
He is the living embodiment of that concept. He had to convert retreat into advance within his own nervous system, within his own atrophied muscles, dragging those 14-pound braces before he could ever hope to do it for the global economy.
He intimately knew the anatomy of paralysis from the inside out. He had already stared down the monster. He knew exactly what the beast looked like.
Absolutely.
But that raises a massive question for me. We know what he did, right? The grueling physical therapy, the braces, the political comeback. But how?
Right. The internal mechanism.
Yeah, where does that psychological bedrock come from? Because 14 pounds of steel might lock your knees in place, but they don't give you the willpower to actually take a step when you are exhausted and terrified.
No, the mechanical support is entirely useless without the internal drive. And this brings us to the core of the blueprint from our source notes today. In his own memoirs, FDR revealed his internal coping mechanism.
What was it?
Well, during his darkest, most terrifying hours, he turned to God for help, courage, and guidance. And he stated very plainly that he received them.
And that ties into the foundational quote we have in our notes today. It comes from an ancient text, Psalm 118, verse 6. It reads, quote, "The Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me?"
Right. And if we look at this strictly from a psychological standpoint, just breaking down the mechanics of human resilience, this is a brilliant, highly effective anchor.
How so?
Think about the concept of the locus of control in psychology.
Okay, break that down for us. What do you mean by locus of control?
Well, your locus of control is basically where you believe the power over your life resides. Like, is it internal or is it external?
Okay.
So during the Great Depression, people's survival was entirely tied to external human systems, banks, employers, the stock market.
Systems that were supposed to be infallible.
Right.
Like you just trust them completely.
Right. And when those human systems suddenly collapse, your brain registers a massive immediate threat to your survival. Your amygdala fires, cortisol floods your system, and your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical reasoning part of your brain, basically shuts down.
You just panic. You freeze.
Exactly. Because the thing you trusted to keep you safe just evaporated into thin air.
But look at what FDR is doing with that psalm. By anchoring his ultimate confidence in a higher power, by declaring, "What can man do to me?" He is cognitively bypassing the fragile human variable altogether.
Oh, wow. Yeah. He's actively shifting his locus of control away from the chaos.
Yes. He is effectively hacking his brain's threat detection system. He's shrinking the existential dread of circumstantial disasters.
Because if your ultimate security isn't tied to the bank or to your political rivals or even to the functioning of your own legs, then the failure of those things cannot fundamentally destroy you.
He's detaching his core safety from the things that are falling apart around him. It's like he's saying, look, the economy is in ruins, I can't walk, everything is on fire, but none of these physical failures dictate my ultimate reality.
It is a radical detachment from the source of the panic. By leaning on a spiritual anchor, he removed the unpredictable, chaotic human element from the equation of his self-worth and his security.
It provided a stable, unmoving point in a completely chaotic universe.
It's like having a compass when all the landmarks around you have burned to the ground. You might not know exactly where you are standing, but you know which way north is, so you can at least take a step.
And that psychological stabilization is what allows the prefrontal cortex to turn back on. It's what allows a person to stop freezing and start planning.
Which brings this whole massive historical epic right down to the ground floor.
Yeah, the source material asks a very simple, piercing question, and I want to turn it directly to you, listening to this right now. Are you afraid today?
It's really the only question that matters when you study history like this.
Because the genius of studying this blueprint is realizing that the mechanics of fear do not change. We are connecting an ancient psalm to a 20th century president navigating a depression, directly to whatever modern late-night worries are keeping you awake right now.
The context changes, but the human nervous system doesn't.
Exactly. Whether it's the fear of a bank failing in 1930, or the fear of a medical diagnosis today, or a sudden job loss, or just the overwhelming low-level anxiety of modern life paralysis is still paralysis.
The feeling of being trapped in a burning room is exactly the same.
And the blueprint for overcoming it remains the same, too. You have to recognize the fear not just as a bad feeling, but as an active force trying to freeze you in place.
And then you have to find an anchor completely outside of the immediate crisis to regain your cognitive footing.
So let's summarize what we've unpacked here today. Fear is potent. It's not just a bumper sticker villain. It can freeze millions of people, causing them to hoard resources and turn on each other.
And it can freeze one of the most powerful men in the world in his bed.
But we've also seen the proof that this paralysis is a reaction, not a permanent life sentence. Reactions can be rewired.
By finding a solid anchor, which for FDR was a profound spiritual reliance and trust in a higher power, it is possible to push back against that unreasoning terror.
You can intentionally shift your reliance away from fragile systems and find the internal courage to convert your retreat into an advance.
It is a literal blueprint for creating momentum out of thin air.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today. Think back to those 14-pound steel braces. FDR's ability to walk didn't just magically return because he had a good attitude.
No, not at all.
He had to deliberately build a heavy, uncomfortable structure to support his weakness.
He needed external reinforcement to physically achieve that forward momentum.
Right. So if fear is the thing that paralyzes us, what are the invisible braces you can build in your own life? What routines, what community connections, what spiritual practices or mental frameworks can you strap on when your own strength fails?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
Think about the structural support you can actively engineer for yourself right now. Because if you have those invisible braces in place and you know where your anchor is, you might just find that you can stand up and walk forward even if the fear hasn't completely gone away.